morning, good afternoon, good evening from beautiful Paris. I'm really delighted to welcome you all for the first Women's Forum Daring Circle virtual session. As you know, our Daring Circle are innovative cross-industry working groups guiding Women's Forum partners both in the public and in the private sectors, academics, experts, NGOs, scientists. We work not only on gender issues, but on critical, crucial issues that concerns the entire humanity. Therefore, we work on women for AI, women for business, women for climate actions, women for health, women for STEM. Key issues where women are disproportionately impacted and where the leadership is paramount. I'm very proud for what we've been achieving in the Daring Circle since 3 years. Thank you. Thank you all for your commitment, your insights, your action, your initiatives. Now it is the time to act and concretize this work. The pandemic has made some of the obstacles to women more visible, but the pandemic demonstrates the essential role women are playing in economies and society. Women are on the front line to take care of the most vulnerable population, but women are also the driving force behind progress in innovation, science, research, policies to fight the pandemics. You know, 91% of the G7 population considers gender equality a priority, according to our Women's Forum barometer. A priority. What are we waiting for? There is a momentum. There is a momentum for she-covery, where women are fully involved with men in shaping a better future for all. Now more than ever, we need women's voices, ambition and action to co-create a more sustainable future. Now more than ever, we need women in the workforce, in the labs, in the boardrooms, at the decision-making tables to lead climate action, to design the future of work, to drive ethical and responsible finance. Now, more than ever, we need a change of paradigm, with women at the heart of the economy, science, and society. This year, we stand ready to lead with power and purpose. Women bringing their added value and their strong contribution across generations, cultures, regions, private and public sectors. We will launch our call to action to G7 and G20 leaders. We will take our flagship meetings and bring the Daring Circle works all around the world. We will spark collective action for inclusive progress. Let's engage for impact, for a she-covery for all.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sophie Lambin, and I'm the editorial partner for the Women's Forum. During this pandemic, containing the virus has been prioritized over other health issues, in particular, the ongoing health challenges of women. Moreover, as women have taken on the increased burden of care, responsibilities for children and others, they have had less time to invest into their own health. They tend to put others' health needs before their own. This lack of invested time can lead to poor health for women in later life. It leads us to the question, how can we change health systems to help women live not just longer lives, but also healthier lives as well? How can women of all ages be part of this change? And how will women's leadership help us face the challenges of two interconnected global issues, public health and climate emergency? So first, to give us a sense of how health and climate intersect and the role of women in confronting this shared challenge, it's my great pleasure to call on Dr. Maria Neira, Director of Environment, Climate Change and Health at the World Health Organization, to share a few words with us. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, ladies, and all the participants. For me, it's always a pleasure to be among women, and particularly women who have plans, who wants to do ideas and put it together and move all of this, always in a very positive way. At the moment we are talking, it's true that in the middle of the pandemic, one of the most important recommendations that we are making from a public health point of view was this idea of, okay, let's wash your hands and have hygiene. Ironically, almost half of the world population, they cannot simply wash their hands because they don't have access to safe water. And this is something that is affecting the whole poor population, but more than anyone, they're the women that are affected. At the moment we are talking, probably many girls are carrying water on their heads and trying to assist with that, their house and their families. And of course, to sacrifice, to do that, they need to sacrifice school. So at the moment we are talking, many girls are abandoning the schools. And this is really something that is very, very concerning. And we all know that if we want women to succeed, to prove and to be part of a society with full rights, they need to go to school. So if the girls now, because of the pandemic, they are abandoning school, they are going into forced marriage as well, more than even before, there will be practices that are totally horrible practices of genital mutilation and things like that, that because of lack of education, because of going more into poverty, we will see more and more those practices. So we need to be very, very careful, very much attentive on making sure that while everybody's kind of accepting now, we already kind of accepted philosophically that we will be back 20 years in terms of reducing poverty, we will be back in terms of education. I refuse to accept it. I simply refuse to accept it. And I'm sure that you as very women who have been fighting for many things, we will never accept this type of what economic indicators are telling us at the moment. We need to recover from COVID-19, that's sure. And I think we need to do the script. We need to write the script. We cannot simply accept what is coming, because what is coming is very bad. It's a pandemic of mental health problems, and obviously women will be very much affected because they are in the middle of the crisis. They are very much at the middle of family care. They are suffering more violence, domestic violence, than before. The figures that were presented by WHO a few weeks ago were absolutely, again, unacceptable. And so we need to be extremely attentive now, more than before, even because the risks are enormous, and I'm particularly concerned about this issue of education. At the moment we are talking as well, in terms of climate change, what are the causes of climate change? The causes of climate change, they overlap very much with the causes of air pollution. At least 75% of the causes are similar, which are burning fossil fuels. And by burning fossil fuels, we are contributing to generating global warming. At the same time, we are contributing to air pollution. And at the same time, we are destroying our health, destroying our economy, and certainly putting as well all the basis for reducing and our protection and increasing our vulnerability from a health point of view, because we are destroying the environment, we are destroying the ecosystems, the biodiversity, and we all know that this will facilitate enormously to break this barrier of animal health and human health. So I think as women, we need to make sure that we will be very active part of this recovery, healthy and green recovery. We have to go to the COP26 with very, very strong messages, not philosophical ones, but clearly saying, stop paying subsidies to fossil fuels, accelerate access to clean fuels for cooking, heating, and lightening the houses of all of those women around the world that they do not have access to clean fuels at the household level, and therefore they are suffering the diseases, plus, again, carrying wood and not going to school, and make sure that we change the life of all of those who have been trapped now by domestic violence because of the confinement, because of the crisis, and they might have even more precarious conditions in terms of jobs that will be generated now. Maybe again, the temptation will be to give priority to male because on the recovery of the economy, we need to prioritize the chief of the house or the family, or things like that. So again, very much alert on what this crisis can bring, and hopefully the women will be the ones driving this healthy and green recovery, changing our model for mobility, raising our voice to stop pollution, because we see how it's affecting the health of our children and our family. There is a group that I love, which is called Moms for Clean Air. And moms, and those moms are furious, and in the good sense, because they realize that air pollution and climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's as concrete as the fact that the air pollution is affected the lungs of their children, and therefore exacerbating the possibility for them to have asthma. And then they see very clearly the connection, and therefore they are putting a lot of pressure on mayors, on policymakers to reduce the traffic in the city, to move on more clean and renewable sources of energy, and better cities to protect their health. So I will stop here, Sophie. I think it's fascinating, this topic, but many things that we can do, but particularly going forward and building forward better, not building back. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. And for that, put that woman at front, and you will see that we will build forward much, much better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for those opening remarks. This intersection between health and climate is definitely very near and dear to the ongoing work of the Women's Forum and those daring circles that Chiara introduced. And what you say about how climate change worsens health challenges, access to education, women's ability to contribute to society is so acute. So the message, we absolutely need to rewrite the script, as you say, so women can play their role to drive a healthy and a green recovery. So thank you for those messages. I hope you can come back a little bit later with a final commentary as we look to our recommendation for the G20. But now I would like to turn to a speaker who is leading with the Women's Forum in both of those areas. Ulrike de Kern, who will share some insights from AXA's own research on how the pandemic has affected women's health in particular, and the specific social challenges it has created as they put their partner, their children, their parents' health before their own. Ulrike, it's a great pleasure to welcome you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, and I'd just like to share a couple of ideas before you get started on this marvelous panel with all your brilliant participants who are much more experts than we are. But it's true, Sophie, we have been partnering with you, with the Women Forum, for over 3 years now on women health, which, of course, as an insurer very active in the healthcare environment, is extremely important to us. I encourage everybody to look at the report that we published in November, I think, 2019, where we really put evidence on the table, strong evidence on the barriers to health that women face. And I do think it's something that is not yet present enough when we look at how can we reverse gender discrimination. Health is such an important topic there. So on our side at AXA, what we have been active on since we really started that journey, and also thanks to our collaboration with the Women Forum. First, of course, it's continuing to advocate, to raise awareness. As I said, I do think this is still something that is not yet on the top of the agenda of people driving action for women empowerment and women and gender equality. And facts that are so important as, for example, increased vulnerability and risk of disability for women despite the longer life expectancy. What are we doing about that? So women live longer lives, but in worse health conditions. So clearly those are topics that we don't see enough in the debate. We also try to incorporate that fact more and more into our offers, into our products, into our services, especially in countries where women-specific disease, as you know, all the breast cancer, cervical cancers are not well covered. We try to really adapt them to those vulnerabilities. We also try to develop, and that's for me a very important point, digital solutions. I do think that digital health, which was also an important finding of the report we did with you, Sophie, the fact that technology brings a lot of solutions for the issues we're talking about when looking at access, inequality for women to health solutions. And last but not least, we support research. We have a wonderful foundation, which is called the AXA Research Fund, and which has funded over 1 million euros since 2018 to research on women-specific health topics. So indeed, I think all this has been important for us for over the past 2 years, but I think it's even more important now, as you mentioned, Sophie, and as Maria was saying, there's really an awareness we need to build that COVID could either, as all of us wish, bring to a better situation after the pandemic, but there's also a big risk that women needs are not taken into account sufficiently. So we commissioned 2 surveys over the past year to better understand the impact COVID had on women's economic situation and their health. We basically asked for their perception. We thought it was the best was to start really with their own perception. So we studied the situation in over close to 10 countries. And just because I don't want to be too long, on the economic side, what we felt across the board, across countries, and especially in Europe, actually, was a very strong feeling of economic vulnerability during COVID due to the feeling that women were losing financial independence, that they were fearing maybe more than men the risk of unemployment. And so this, I think, when we talk about women well-being, is weighing very strongly on their overall situation as we are looking to the fallout of the crisis. And on health, which was also a specific survey that we did, I would like to mention 3 main outcomes. One, which everybody talks about, but was so strongly in our findings, which was about the mental load that the pandemic had put on women. And we found, for example, that 1/3 of the women mentioning that they were suffering depression had started experiencing that during the pandemic, due to the pandemic. So that's a huge, huge increase in the risk of depression. The second topic that worried us in the findings was how massively women had postponed treatments over the pandemic due to, of course, the risks that they were fearing in going to hospitals or going to the doctor, but also due to the fact that most of them stated they were putting their family's health before their own. And so that 3 out of 4 women were stating that they would first go to a doctor or to a hospital for their children and their parents rather than for themselves. And I do think this is a sort of ticking time bomb that we need to be aware of. And last but not least, and Maria mentioned it, when we come to looking at health and well-being, the rise in the risk of domestic violence was also something very, very present across the board. So, I mean, clearly, I think this is I hope this is a good way for you to start the discussion. There is a sense of urgency when we read those figures, when we look at those numbers, and very much looking forward to what our participants have to say today on that important topic. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there's an echo. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Ulrike. I would like to give you a chance, Ulrike, to answer one question that moderator of the next panel will ask you. So If you can stay with us, that would be wonderful. So I'd like to move to our panel discussion now and introduce you to our moderator, Elizabeth Jeffert. Elizabeth is an experienced leader in the biotech industry and an advisor for women-founded and women-led companies. She brings some vital experience on diseases of aging, and we are really excited to have her lead the discussion that will follow. Elizabeth, over to you to maybe go briefly back to our two Firestarter speakers with some opening questions.
Thank you, Sophie. And yes, before we start our panel, I would love to ask Maria and Ulrika one big question, and that is this. As part of the Women's Forum and these daring circles, we'd like to come up with a list of recommendations and a list of actions that we could bring forward to the G20. So I'll ask both of you, Maria, Ulrika, what is your one daring idea that you believe that we should bring forward to the G20 to say, this is what you could do to improve the state of women in 2021 as we go into this she-covery?
If I can start, Elizabeth, the fact that you ask me one, you complicate my life, you know, I mean, one, you kidding me. If I have the opportunity to influence the G20, and I hope we will together, I will not ask it then just one thing, I will ask several. First of all, I will ask it then to, you know, everybody talks about carbon neutral by 2050. Do you realize what that means? That means in 30 years from now, no way. So my first daring request to them will be, please accelerate speed and ambition. Come on. And if you are not able to do it, let a woman do it. We will accelerate that. Put the moms for lungs with asthmatic children in charge. You will see the acceleration on action to reduce air pollution and tackling the causes of climate change. Second, maybe because of what I said before we need to be more alert than before, that now with the economic crisis, everybody will be kind of accepted nicely that, you know, poverty, we are going back 20 years, education, we are going back, women's rights, we are going back, no way. Maybe they need to create a kind of observatory or something with 2 or 3 indicators to make sure that if we all are going to recover and not just, you know, giving us behind just because in the name of the recovery. And then maybe as well, the last one will be stop paying fossil fuels. I mean, stop paying subsidies to fossil fuels, because this is literally killing us, killing our lungs, killing our health. And those who are much more affected are women and children and little girls. So I will start with that, but maybe I will have even more requests for them. But let's start with 3 ones. Over.
Excellent. Excellent. Ulrika, how about you?
So I agree with Maria, it's very difficult, but if I had to choose one, and because Maria has pushed so strongly for climate, which I completely subscribe to, I really think that a lot of our issues have a solution through innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. I was really amazed of all the creativity, the solution that very often women, tech leaders, tech entrepreneurs can bring to the table. So I do think that ensuring that after, after COVID, all these women with entrepreneurial, spirit and willing to bring a solution can have access to funding to really build those solutions we need, will also have not to be overlooked. That would be my one proposal.
I think that's lovely. I loved what you said about tech coming together with health to find solutions. Wonderful. Thank you, ladies. And now I believe we'll start our panel. And I would love to introduce our 3 distinguished panelists. First, we have Dr. Lorna Friedman, who's a senior partner at Mercer, working with multinationals on the global health strategies. And she's been working with the Daring Circle on the initial research looking at the challenges of women founders in health tech. Next, we have Dr. Nicole Karam, who is Women Forum's Rising Talent 2019. Congrats on that, Nicole. She's Associate Professor in Cardiology at the European Hospital Georges Pompidou at the University of Paris. And she's also a researcher and expert in cardiovascular epidemiology and an expert in sudden cardiac death, heart valve diseases, and women's cardiovascular disease, which I know we'll get into in a bit in the panel. And then finally, Dr. Pauline Williams, CBE, is a head of global health R&D at GSK. And she also previously ran the maternal and neonatal health division there. She has a background in drug discovery and development, obviously, and she's worked in a range of therapeutic areas. So welcome to the three of you. And as Sophie said, I'm your moderator. I'm Elizabeth Jeffords. I'm an advisor in residence with Springboard, which is an accelerator for women-founded and women-led businesses. And I have a biotech and pharmaceutical background working with Roche, Genentech, and Alkahest in neurology, women's health, oncology, ophthalmology, and other diseases of aging. So I think we can kick this off. We heard our panelists and our fire starters talk about the need for a post-pandemic she-covery. So if we take that panel or that sort of word and look at both sides of the meaning of that, the she-covery can mean an economic recovery. It can also mean a health recovery. So let's dig into that and peel that back. Panelists, 2020 was intended to be the year of the woman. Something else came up, and that was the pandemic. We had amazing progress for women before the pandemic. We had an increase in pay equality. We had an increase in female-led companies, female leaders on boards, females in venture capital. And then the pandemic came and it set pretty much everything back. And now we have yet another pharmaceutical company looking to offload their women's health unit. And yet we are seeing a groundswell of smaller tech and health companies looking into the femtech industry. So what is happening, right? Will we she-cover from the pandemic? Will we have that benefit come back again? Lorna, can you start and tell us what you think about the economic meaning of the she-covery?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. It's really a privilege to be here. I want to start on the upside, if you will, and that COVID has really shown that office-based businesses can be really agile. Our survey showed that flexible working arrangements, which were highly sought by women and millennials, were sort of endlessly debated. And only about 12% of employers actually had fully flexible options. Well, that changed overnight. And our last survey suggested 86% of employers will retain flexible arrangements. But the pandemic also laid bare the underlying structural inequalities facing women, and particularly women of color. So women are overrepresented in roles that could not flex, that are more vulnerable to the economic downturn. Essential workers, hotel, food services, education. And thus they're 4 more times likely to be leaving the workplace due to job loss in their sector or bowing out due to caregiving needs.
Absolutely. Let me dig into that caregiving piece a little bit more because I think it's so important. What is that like? What's the economic reality of life on the personal level for a working woman, a working mother during the pandemic, particularly as a caregiver?
Sure, I can start, but I'm sure others have other comments. And again, you know, this is an arena where office-based workers were supported, and we saw almost 25% increase in employers either giving stipends for either home tutoring or stipends for other types of services. And in general, employers actually did pretty well. They 70 to 80% approval rates. However, for women, that was almost 10% lower than men. Granted, they have, and every kind of survey can show that women felt more responsible for taking care of their children, for home tutoring. And additionally, the other kind of cool aspect of the early days of COVID was the situation with older the older population being vulnerable. So women who had both young children or maybe even had older children also now had older parents who were in more dangerous situations if they were in traditional nursing home or care homes.
Fantastic. Okay, Pauline, let's go over to you. Thinking about that economic she-covery, what do you think that the last year has taught us? Will we come back to where we were in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, when we were all feeling so good about where we were as women?
Well, I certainly hope so, and I am optimistic, but I think there are some worrying signs. And I heard a phrase the other day that may be familiar with many of you, but I hadn't heard it before, which is in the research setting, no decision about me without me. And I think across the board, we have seen, as Chiara said, an underrepresentation of women in decision-making bodies, in research and business and policy-making bodies as well. And I think although there's recognition that there's more that we can do there, and there had been great progress, I was struck by, in the COVID-19 pandemic, the proliferation of task forces that arose. And there was a paper in the BMJ Global Health last year that said of the 115 new task forces that they surveyed, only 3.5% had gender parity. And that's just shocking, because we need to be moving for those research and policy decisions to be made by and with women rather than to and for. And just recently, in the last couple of weeks, the Global Health 50/50 report, actually the title of that report is Flying Blind in a Time of Crisis, because they too have noticed that in COVID-19, the decisions and the policy making groups that have arisen are not gender diverse and not ethnic, don't have ethnic diversity either, which I think has set us back a long time. So I hope we can recover from that.
Mm-hmm. I know there's been this rise of social media discussion around femtech and the women's health industry. And again, this notion of that women's health is not a niche market. How mad do you get when you hear that women's health is a niche market?
Oh gosh, well, when I ran the maternal and neonatal health unit, I was struck by, basically everything that seemed to be below the waist came to me, and it really struck me, and I'm sure the other panelists can talk to this, around needing to think about females in totality, and all of the illnesses that women will face, and the diversity that we need to incorporate within that. And so yes, I think but it is a struggle, actually, in terms of not only thinking about research for women-specific illnesses and that being seen as niche, but also taking a step back and looking at the whole person, and females not just being a sort of from a gynecological and obstetric point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about that health side. So switching to the notion of she-covery as a literal recovery, and that is a health recovery. Let's talk about the health impacts of the pandemic, and not necessarily just the infectious disease impacts, but the whole health impacts. So Nicole, coming over to you, what do you think were the major health impacts of the pandemic and of COVID-19?
Well, I'm glad that you talked about the non-infectious effect, because everybody tends to focus on the infectious effect of the pandemic, but there are lots of effects of the pandemic on other aspects of healthcare, and we will see that with time. So we've been having studies showing in New York, in Italy, and in France with my team, we saw patients, we saw much more cases of sudden cardiac death during the pandemic. And we were trying to find what's happening. I mean, you can die from COVID. We are in a pandemic, but when you die from something else, then there's a problem. And what we saw is that actually people are seeking care very, very late, and they are postponing their appointments with the doctor. Everything that is prevention, screening, they are postponing those. And that's most probably the reason for this. And this is something where we have been seeing, and as you said, every time there are some delays in seeking care, women tend to be the first in this, because they tend to prioritize other aspects of their lives at this point, and their families and their children and all of that. So this is an immediate effect that we've been seeing. Now, on the long run, this stressful lifestyle that we are having, this stress, this sedentary life we're having with the pandemic and the lockdown, we're probably going to see the effect on the longer run. So will she cover? I mean, for now, if you had a sudden death, you had it. If you seek care a little bit too late and you have already cardiac damage, you have to live with those. And the other question is, what are we building with our health for the future? And this is something we're going to see in a few years.
So, Nicole, here's a question coming in from the audience. So many of us are thinking perhaps that we're not at risk for sudden cardiac death, but the fact is we're building the path to our cardiac health, even as we're in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s. What can we do to build healthy aging into our lives, even when we're in our 30s and 40s, to make sure that we're doing the right things for preventative health care?
Oh, first, there are two aspects of this question. If we consider that we are not at risk because we are women, this is an old belief, and it comes from older times when women tended to have less heart disease, which is not the case today. Today, more than 1/3 of sudden cardiac death occur in women. And this is a shift that we have been seeing. We see a decrease among men, an increase among women, and we are catching up with the men. So we want equality, but maybe we don't want to have it in sudden cardiac death. So there are improvements in men that we are not observing in women. So we shouldn't consider that we are women, we don't have sudden cardiac death. Now, if we say that we are too young, nobody is too young for sudden cardiac death. Of course, with aging, we have more risk. But I mean, if you look at the patients we have patients from all ages, and they're not specifically patients. Sometimes those are healthy people unaware of their current status. So it's important to look into your own familiar history, see what you have. Do I have a sudden cardiac death in the family? Did I have a myocardial infarction in the family? At what age did it start? Because we know that if it started early in your family, then you are at risk earlier. And then we should remember that sitting down, being sedentary because the gym is closed, we can go to the sports, smoking, which can increase because it is stress. All these are situations where we are building up for the future. And drinking, yeah, it depends. I mean, if it's a small glass of wine every other time, it's okay. But everything is in the excessive use, and let's not forget, when you are sitting and eating and not practicing any sport, all this is a risk. And then the most important risk is not screening. Every woman, every person should know what is his cardiovascular risk profile. Do I have cholesterol? Do I have hypertension? We should check for that every other time to make sure if we are building up for something.
All right, ladies, you heard it here. Dr. Nicole tells us a small glass of wine is okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Pauline, I believe that you were going to tell us a bit about the impact of COVID on health as well. Oh, Pauline, I think you're on mute. The most common phrase used over the last year.
Sorry. Yeah, it's. I think we saw in the Ebola outbreaks spikes in maternal mortality, and I think we're starting to see that again coming out through the COVID-19 pandemic, and just some recent data published by UNICEF in the last week or so, studying South Asia and starting to see they're modelling about a 16% increase in maternal mortality, and also I think actually this was mentioned by Maria, the number of children who were not able to go to school because of the school closures. Now, a large proportion sorry, not a large proportion, but a significant number of girls will never go back to school, and that really is going to have a lifelong impact on their health. So I think really a concerning statistic that we need to watch out as that emerges.
Okay, yes, absolutely. That is a big issue. And I think that's a good point, that oftentimes, and I'm glad that we're talking about cardiac health as well as maternal health, because when we talk about women's health, sometimes we concentrate on what is sometimes called bikini health, or the organs that would be covered by a bikini. And yet, when we really think about women's health, we want to think about the whole woman and any disease that uniquely or disproportionately or differentially affects women. So for each of you, short answers, please. What is one area of women's health that you think deserves more attention? Let's see. Pauline, we're going to come back to you first on that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to sort of zone in on one particular therapeutic area, but I'm just going to advocate for thinking about clinical trial diversity, and let's really think about how we can design studies where we're looking at the full range of a woman's experience, and so making sure that we're representing real world data. We're not just filling a checkbox to say a regulator demands that we have females done. You know, we're thinking about making sure that we're getting the range of educational status, of geography, of poverty and wealth, and considering not just female by birth, but also transgender and non-binary as well, so that we're really getting a full picture of diversity, and including racial diversity within that.
Fantastic. Nicole.
Well, as a cardiologist, but also as an epidemiologist, I have to say it's cardiovascular disease. I'm not saying that it is an exclusivity for women, but I'm really sad to see that we're still doing lots of campaigns on breast cancer and cervical cancer. But let's face it, women die more frequently from cardiovascular disease than from gynecologic cancers. And this is something that is still lacking. We are still not focusing enough on cardiovascular disease in women. And there's another thing I have to give two answers, which is a very unique specificity for women, which is birth control pills. And we start building a better future with birth control pills very soon. I mean, we need them, but we need to control cardiovascular risk factors when we take preventive pills, birth control pills, and this is not always done. And everybody's talking about thrombosis with current vaccines. Then let's talk about thrombosis with birth control pills. And this is something only women have, and they are not aware of the risk.
Well, I can't help but ask, what would be your alternative?
We have to take, when the gynecologist or the GP is giving a birth control pill, and I do insist on its necessity, he needs to check for other cardiovascular risk factors. The woman has to be aware that you need to stop smoking, for example. You should take the pill, but you do not need to smoke. So keep the pill, but control your cholesterol level, stop smoking, try to do some sports. So we have an additional risk factor, which is this birth control pill. We have to live with it, and it's useful and we need it. But we have to control our other risk factors if we have this pill. So this is something men don't have to have if they are young, but women have it very, very soon. So.
Okay. Another panel we can get into why we need more male contraceptive options. But Lorna, what about you? What's your area that you think that we should be concentrating on more during the pandemic or after?
You know, I think Dr. Crum has really highlighted that social determinants are really an imperative piece. If women are to find time to do sport or to alter their behavior, they have to have the economic power to do so. And particularly when we think about social determinants, mental health, which coming out of this pandemic is the #1 area of concern for employers. And 70% of employers are looking to expand their mental health and well-being services. But as you know, Elizabeth, it's also a key area for technology investment and capital investment, but it is an area, and importantly so, because current methodologies are not scalable, right? Even in the United States, 60% of rural counties do not have a psychiatrist. But mental health is also an area where we have very few biomarkers, right? And we rely on surveys, and that may rely on dated and maybe even oppressive gender norms. So we often quote that women have more depression, but as per our prior conversations, per the WHO, per what happened in Atlanta and in London this week, women are also the recipients of a great deal of violence. So having women founders and acknowledging the need to look at mental health from a social lens, I think is imperative.
That's really a good point. And I think that it's unfortunate that we need to include violence in our definition of health care, right? That's an issue of healthcare, but you're right, that is, it's an issue that's been very prevalent in the news in the last weeks across multiple countries, but it's not really anything that is new. You had a notion, Lorna, I think you were talking about sort of boomerangs. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So we talk a lot about, or we frame sort of a post-pandemic world in a world of what we call either frisbees or boomerangs, right? So what things may return to what they were before, and what things may change forever. And certainly digital health is a major frisbee, right? We saw a 4,000% increase in the United States, but hopefully, I think, still some personal care, and again, the ability to come in and do screening, which really you can't do on a digital, right? You really need screening, particularly for cancers, particularly for other preventive measures. So we were hoping, and again, we've seen early evidence of that when we kind of had a brief moment in the US where people did actually return to on-site care.
I'm going to ask one question too about one area that I don't think any of you brought up specifically, although mental health gets to this, is that one area of health which is not often included in our discussion of women's health is aging, and particularly neurological aging or brain health. Alzheimer's affects two-thirds of the people that suffer from Alzheimer's are women. Women over 65 are often somewhat more invisible in our society and even in our healthcare. Does women's health stretch just from menarche to menopause, or does it really stretch from cradle to grave? Pauline, what do you think?
Well, I mean, absolutely cradle to grave. And I think there are so many determinants from birth, essentially, that are going to really impact a woman's health right through to the grave, from neurological, cardiovascular, and others. And I think there are some key inflection points and investment areas where I think we really would get better return on investment around, as I've mentioned, education of girls, secondary education, really equipping women with and empowering girls around expectation of health and healthcare. The perinatal period is, I think, an impact for not just lifelong health of the mother, in terms of, for example, preeclampsia having long-term effects in terms of later health, but also the lifelong health of the child as well. And then I think perimenopausal care as well. And just one point, a paper that I read just quite recently, which I was fascinated by, was in terms of what are the key determinants of healthy aging in women, and a prospective study in over 30,000 women in the US. And the key determinant that came out was optimism. And that's, you can't just say, well, a behavioral trait is going to determine how healthy you are in older age. But I think that optimism to me represents a surrogate marker of empowerment and a belief that you own your health and you're going to educate yourself about health. That factors into diet, in exercise, in keeping mentally stimulated, and social interaction as well, all of which have an impact in later life health, and also an expectation, healthcare seeking behaviour, and an expectation and a right to healthcare at the appropriate time as well. So I think there's a lot there in terms of instilling that sense of optimism by what we offer women at different stages of their lives.
Oh, I think that's a great point. There's the sort of optimism, the financial security, the social network, and certainly what, Nicole, you were talking about, the exercise and continuing that through life, which can make a huge difference. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to remind our audience, we have Dr. Williams, Dr. Friedman, Dr. Karam. You're not going to get a chance with experts like this very often, so please send in your questions, and we're going to try to ask some. I have one here now I'm going to throw in. Beyond the recovery, how can business play an active role in supporting their female employees with healthy living and aging? And I'm going to throw in one with that, and caregiving, since we mentioned that early. Anyone?
Well, you're preempting one of my my daring asks around. I firmly believe that businesses should be expected to have policies around supporting women through menopause, and that's educating men and women, demystifying it. Let's have the unembarrassed conversations about something that all women will go through at some point in their life, some earlier, some later, and let's have policies that really support women to flourish at a point where they're likely to be around the peak of their career.
Yes, I think anyone on this panel have gone into a majorly important meeting and starting having a sort of a hot flash sweat attack. I certainly have. But I've also had to do presentations very, very pregnant, and also had difficulty breathing during that. And to share that I think that, and it's not because you're nervous, it's literally because of lung volume. So there's lots of times we can have those discussions, right? Okay, anyone else have ideas for our businesses?
Well, this is my area of work, and I certainly think, again, caregiving, to kind of go back to that, it really needs to shift, in my opinion, from being a women's issue to really a basic infrastructure requirement for an economy and for a business. And, you know, there's increasing acknowledgement of that. There's legislation in India requiring creche support. But again, per the Lancet article recently, 70% of global caregiving is women and girls. And it really also then lends itself to the earlier conversation about education. There was a study done in India that showed if businesses supplied childcare at the site for their mothers, for working mothers, their daughters completed their education. And it was irrelevant for their sons, but it infers that when women do not have caregiving support within the business environment where they work, they rely on their daughters, and we land up with a generational cycle. So, and lastly, as a pediatrician, it's good for kids. You know, if you look at 40 years in the United States of Head Start data, that was aimed at 2 to 3 year olds, and that data is rock solid that those kids do better.
Nicole, I think I have one here for you. Along cardiovascular risk factors, should we also now look at other hormone-related risk factors which are different between the genders? If so, how do we build that groundswell? Women's hormonal issues tend to be swept under the carpet.
Well, actually, if we are talking strictly about the cardiovascular disease, hormones, if we speak naturally speaking, without any birth control pill and non-hormone replacement therapy, we know that before menopause, women are supposed to be protected by their hormones. And this is where the common belief came from, saying that women don't have cardiovascular disease. And this is true. At a given age, if we are talking about a woman of 45 years old, she's kind of protected by her hormones until menopause. And after menopause, the women are going to get to the same risk level as males. But this is if we take the spontaneous cycle. Now, if we go through the addition of hormone replacement therapy, then this decrease in hormone won't be observed, but we have the birth control pills earlier in life, and at this point we have again to look at classical risk factors, because this was put the birth control pill can help can increase the level of cholesterol, and it can lead to other complications like thrombosis. Now, there's another aspect in the life of a woman, which is pregnancy. And during pregnancy and the postpartum period, then again, women can have some cardiac disease that are really specific to the cardiac state. So we have the cardiomyopathies that are specific to the pregnancy, and there's other kind of cardiomyopathies that we see after childbirth. So this is again a period of time where the heart of the woman should be really checked. And the other aspect also for, again, where the hormones play a role is, again, during pregnancy, is on hypertension. So if women have a predisposition for hypertension, they may develop higher pressure during pregnancy, and again for diabetes. So all these hormonal change during life should be accompanied by a good, strict control of cardiovascular risk. But they are not necessarily, you don't have to dose your hormones, but you know that in different phases of your life, you will have a different risk.
Makes sense, makes sense. So I'm going to take us to our last big question. And then if we have time after that, we'll take any more audience questions. But this is, you knew it was coming. What is your one big daring idea for our Women's for Health panel to present back for consideration to the G20? Could be business, could be health, but what is that one thing that you would like us to consider? Let's see, who wants to go first? Pauline?
Yeah, well, I'm like Maria.
I've
got a drop-down list, but I will perhaps just pick up on a point that Lorna made, which is the 70% of healthcare workers being female. And I think there we have an enormous research resource that we can tap into, and we can move away from the north-south divide with my global health head, and also really the research with and by women. How can we tap into that healthcare resource to be allies and equip those women with the right training and the right tools to really provide locally relevant solutions for their populations.
That's fantastic. Nicole?
Well, I guess you kind of guessed what will be my daring idea. My daring idea is really to adjust the prevention campaigns that we do with women, and really shed the light on the cardiovascular disease, and give it the same importance that we are giving nowadays for breast cancer screening and for colon cancer screening and for all other screenings. So let's fight for cardiovascular disease among women.
And Lauren?
Well, I would reiterate where we started off, which is leadership matters. And therefore, I would suggest quotas. If you look at the success of Title IX in the United States in increasing women's participation in college and graduate school, and if you look at the current representation of women on boards in France, we know that quotas work, and we are already seeing employers embracing racial and disability quotas for employees. And we clearly cannot wait for another pandemic or a crisis to bring more voices to the table.
Fantastic. And if I could just add one, I will bring us back to this notion of women and aging, is that, with our global goals, and I'm wearing my global goals pin, that we have global goals 3 and 5 address health care and women's equality. But I don't think that we really touch on aging in the global goals. And that's mainly because that we're addressing more of the needs of lower and middle income countries. But the growing demographics tell us that in the developed countries, we're going to have this silver tsunami, and it's going to have profound implications on our climate and the health resources that we use to take care of people in their late life. A large proportion of those people are going to be women, and they will not have the financial or health resources that they would if they were men. And so we need to really look at how we understand the needs for health care and for long-term care for women. And that includes bringing in technology solutions to help with that as well. I believe maybe we have maybe one more question. I think this is a good one. We've been focusing a lot on women. How do we as women take steps, or what actions can we take to engage the men that we work with, that we live with, that we're raising as sons, to take actions to help increase the health and well-being of women? And pardon to the audience member, I really did just adapt your question a little bit to be even bigger. But it's a great question.
Well, I'll start, because I think it is a really good question and a really good point, because we have sort of taken this view in terms of, you know, you need women to be gender inclusive, and then the implication is that men are gender exclusive, and that's not fair. And I think what we need to do is just raise our voice and ask and demand that men are our allies, and I think they will come forward. You know, the men that I work with and the men that I live with, I've got 2 grown-up sons and a lovely husband. You know, they are all sons, brothers, have daughters, and you know, and wives, and really do want to be part of this. So I think we just need to, rather than create too much of a clique and a women's only initiative, we really do need to actually reach out to men and ask them to be our allies in this.
I like that. It's not us versus them. It's not fewer female cardiac deaths as a percentage. It's just fewer cardiac deaths, period, right? Anyone else?
I guess that women should learn to speak up. I mean, I had the feeling that at some point women were accused of being weak, and we tend to build this shell and to pretend that we are doing well. I mean, you often, I mean, if we all know this joke that if a man is sick, then he will show it. If a woman is sick, then she will hide it. And we want to show that we are strong, that everything's going well. But I guess we need to learn to speak up and say, no, we are sick. This is a difficult period. This is a menopause. This is a pregnancy. So we need to maybe stop hiding our weakness and show the people it's not a weakness, it's a reality. And then just speak up, just be honest, just say that this is difficult. You know, your son that you are raising, your husband, if he shows what you're going through, then he will be sensitive to what is happening with his colleague at work later on. So maybe we should start by speaking up and then stop hiding our disease. Just be a man for that. Just say what you're feeling. And I guess we need to learn first to speak too.
I like that. And it's a great word of
yeah. So I guess if I may just add, I think it is really cynical to view progress as a zero-sum game. And right, the more opportunity that we create, the more we address collectively having different voices, the more innovation we have and can bring to the challenges we have at hand, the better off we will all collectively be.
That's a great way to end. Well, panelists, Dr. Pauline Williams, Dr. Lorna Friedman, Dr. Nicole Karam, clearly experts in the field and women making a difference. So thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'm going to bring Sophie Lamben back to the stage for concluding remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, all of you. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your masterful moderation of this conversation. So many great insights and calls to action shared today. So let me try to pick a few that have particularly inspired me. So first of all, I think we were all inspired by the fighting spirit embodied by Dr. Maranera when she said we refuse to accept that women will simply be set back by decades. Thank you, Maria, for showing us how climate and health, infectious disease, asthma are deeply interconnected. Then our speakers today have really outlined women's health challenges, but giving us many reasons for optimism. And not least because we were delighted to hear, Pauline, that optimism is a predictor for healthy life for women. which is an excellent news. But as you say, this links to so many social determinants of health, such as violence, time, economic stability, and even education. And that finally, maybe that women's health does not stop at the womb, but that we need to treat women as a whole, from the health of your mind to the health of your heart, and lay the preventive groundwork young for healthy aging later in life. So to shift women's health from a niche to mainstream in the global agenda, we need research and decision with and by women. This is really where the work of our Daring Circle comes in, focusing on bringing data to put women's health at the center of this international agenda. So a pale summary of the rich discussion you had, but I thought I would try to pick up some of the key points that really struck a chord. And again, I really want to thank you for your time and for your insights. As you know, we will now move into networking sessions in a networking room, which we have had for every one of those sessions in the last week, which have been incredibly, lovely moment of connection and exchange around those issues we've discussed. So, dear speakers and moderator, if you're able to stay with us and join us in those networking rooms, we would love that. And participants, thank you for your questions, and I hope we will see as many of you as possible in the networking room as well. So in order to do so, you'll see a button will appear on the interactivity tab of the chat, and you can also find the link posted in the discussion tab of the chat, or click on the button at in the menu at the top of your screen. So I think there's 3 entry points to those conversations. I hope you can join us. And let me close again by thanking everyone for the great participation. Thank you, and see you tomorrow at 5:30 Paris time. Bye-bye.
Bye.